It is late October 9th, 2022 here in Bangkok, Thailand, +7 GMT. This is the day after the Ukrainian bombing of the Crimean Bridge, connecting Crimea with the rest of Russia. Ukrainian officials, the Western media, are more or less saying that it was Ukraine behind the attack. We have articles like this from the Washington Post. Amid Ukrainian taunts, Russia scrambles to salvage Crimean Bridge after fiery explosion. Well, they salvaged it. The bridge was operational the very same day as the bombing. The Washington Post says Ukrainian commanders had publicly promised to attack the bridge as recently as June, and a Ukrainian government official told the Washington Post on Saturday that Ukrainian special services were behind the bridge attack. The Ukrainska Pravda news site first reported the government's purported role, citing an unidentified law enforcement official who says Ukraine's security service, the SBU, was involved. But like I said, the bridge is back in operation. Check out this article. Reuters via Yahoo Finance. Limited road traffic resumes on intact lanes of Crimea Bridge. This article explains limited road traffic resumes on intact lanes of Crimea Bridge, says Russia's transport ministry on Saturday. Limited road traffic for cars and buses had resumed on intact lanes of the Crimean Bridge, which was hit by an explosion early in the morning. The article also notes that heavy goods vehicles would have to wait to cross by ferry. So there is damage that still needs to be repaired, but the bridge is more or less operational. Will this cause disruptions for civilian and military logistics? I think that it will cause disruptions, but these are disruptions contingencies can adequately handle. Now, as I have explained before, the whole idea of this attack, this terrorist attack on civilian infrastructure, was to completely cut off Crimea and Kherson from the rest of Russia. And I want to show you what this looks like on a map, liveuamap.com. Again, this is pro-Ukrainian. If we zoom in here, this is where the bridge is. They hit it here, and so they were cutting Crimea off from the rest of Russia this way. But here is the ferry. There is a ferry. This is how they sent things beforehand. There's this strip of land with rail and road. There's a ferry terminal, and the ferry transports goods and people back and forth this way. That is operational. So it wasn't completely cut off. But then the idea is for Ukraine from Zaporozhye city to push down into Russian-held territory, well, now part of the Russian Federation, according to Moscow, to perhaps Melitopol or somewhere in this region to cut the land bridge as well. And in theory, Ukraine believes that would isolate Russian forces in Kherson and Crimea. But this is a huge amount of land. Crimea has been part of Russia for 8 years. Before that, there was a Russian military base in Crimea. They have huge amounts of equipment and ammunition on the peninsula. Of course, it is necessary to continue shipping supplies, equipment, vehicles, ammunition into the peninsula. But there's a huge amount that can be staged in Crimea itself. So the idea of cutting the bridge off, cutting the land bridge, and somehow stranding Russian forces there, it is not entirely impractical, but it's not as devastating as, say, encircling a single city, because we're talking about so much land, so much equipment and vehicles and ammunition could be staged in this huge amount of area that would sustain Russian combat operations for a very long time, and it would allow Russian ships to come in by sea. There are ports there, and deliver everything that they need to continue fighting. The offensive has not been launched yet. Everyone is waiting for Ukraine to launch their offensive. So let's look at the map again, just to take a look at what's going on. Around Kherson, the front line has stabilized. Ukraine is preparing for another push. Russia is preparing to defend against another push. We're waiting for some sort of offensive to be launched by Ukraine along this front line, again, to cut off the land bridge. There is fighting around Donetsk. Of course, there is fighting around Bakhmut. Right here. And I'm going to get into this a little bit later on. And in this case, Russia is making progress, and it is Ukraine losing territory. And then, of course, the line here has more or less stabilized. This was the Kharkov offensive, the area taken by Ukraine, and as soon as they reached places like Lyman, Russian resistance was quite stiff, and it ground their offensive to a halt. They managed to take Lyman. Now they face a fortified Russian defense line. This is going to be very difficult. Any push forward that they make from this point on is going to be grinding and incremental. It's going to expend Ukrainian forces, ammunition, vehicles, and I'm going to get into that as well. Despite the attack on the Crimean Bridge, it went operational very quickly. Even if they did manage to take the bridge out completely, would this have made a major difference? Of course, it will undoubtedly disrupt logistics, civilian and military logistics, to a certain extent, but is this going to change the outcome of this conflict? In other words, is this going to be what delivers victory to Ukraine? And the answer is no, because victory for Ukraine is pushing Russian forces out of everywhere Ukraine considers Ukrainian territory, which includes Crimea, and that is never going to happen. So ultimately, this is not going to change the outcome. The outcome of this conflict is going to be Ukraine exhausting its military forces before they achieve what they consider victory. That is a fact. And that is not Russian propaganda saying that. That is the Western media. And I've been reporting on this for months, talking about how unsustainable this all is, how there's going to be a limit, how when Ukraine loses certain pieces of equipment, or once the West is out of ammunition to send Ukraine, there is no more to send. Look at this ABC Australia news article. This was posted yesterday. U.S. ammunition supplies dwindle as Ukraine war drains stockpiles. Okay, and again, this is something that I have been talking about for a very long time. The article says the United States will soon be unable to provide Ukraine with certain types of ammunition that are essential to Kiev's battle against Russia's invasion, as supplies are being used up faster than they can be replaced. I have been pointing this out for a very long time. The article also says Washington has become by far the largest supplier of arms to Ukraine since Russia launched the invasion on February 24th, with more than $16.8 billion in military assistance provided since that date. And this helps answer the question that I always get. Well, Brian, maybe the US is running out of ammunition and vehicles to send to Ukraine, but they have all these other allies. Well, they're sending even less. Even when you add it all up, it's still less than what the United States has sent. So if the US is running out and they have nothing else to send, then for argument's sake, Ukraine is not getting anything substantial after that. The article continues. It says, but U.S. stockpiles of some equipment are reaching the minimum levels needed for war plans and training, and restocking to pre-invasion levels could take years. And this is someone from the Center for Strategic and International Studies providing their analysis on this topic. The article talks about Javelin missiles, Stinger missiles, they are running out. Notice how you don't hear anything about them anymore. I had pointed out a U.S. Army study published by Fort Benning, U.S. Army base Fort Benning, and they were talking about how under training conditions, well-trained U.S. soldiers were hitting targets, just hitting the target, only 19% of the time with with anti-tank missiles like TOW, Javelin, things like this. If you're sending these to Ukraine, you didn't properly train them to use these weapon systems specifically. They are not properly trained as soldiers, and they are under wartime conditions. It'll be much less than 19%. And then out of that much smaller percent, we're just talking about scoring a hit on a tank. What percentage out of that is an actually disabled or destroyed tank? Very small percentages. We're talking single-digit percentages here. But they're out. The U.S. is out of these missiles, and I've covered this in previous updates. It will be years, at least 3 years, before they can get those in production and delivered. The article also talks about 155 millimeter artillery rounds. This is what the M777s fire and all of these self-propelled artillery systems that NATO has been sending Ukraine. It says the United States has also supplied more than 800,000 NATO standard 155 millimeter artillery rounds to Kiev, 3/4 of the total amount delivered by all Western countries, according to official Pentagon statistics. Again, what did I say? The U.S. is sending the majority. All of America's allies combined are sending less. When you add it all up, it's still less than what the U.S. has sent. U.S. production of these shells currently stands at 14,000 per month, but the Pentagon has announced that it aims to increase that figure to 36,000 within 3 years. That would still only bring annual production to 432,000, less than half of what has been provided to Ukraine in 7 months, not even a whole year, 7 months. And that is entirely inadequate. And I want to put that number into further context, more context. Take a look at this article here from The Guardian. We're almost out of ammunition and relying on Western arms, says Ukraine. This is from June of this year. This article says Ukraine is using between 5,000 to 6,000 artillery rounds a day, according to Ukraine's deputy head of military intelligence. We have almost used up all of our artillery ammunition and are now using 155 caliber NATO standard shells, he said, of the ammunition that is fired from artillery pieces. So let's just imagine that the US is able to ramp up artillery round production to 36,000 rounds per month. Ukraine is firing 6,000 rounds per day, and that was in June. That was before the offensive started. That gives Ukraine enough ammunition to last 6 days. I guess they have the rest of the month off. This is a major problem for Ukraine and its sponsors, and there literally is no solution to this problem. There is no physical way to create this ammunition faster than they're already trying. It will take years to do. And Ukraine is in trouble right now. Let's take a look at another example. Another example of the dwindling support from the West for Ukraine. This is a BBC article. Ukraine war questions over France's weapon supply to Kiev. This was from 6 days ago. And you see a self-propelled howitzer there. And what does this article say? It says, if France wants to lead Europe to a new era of military self-reliance, how come its contribution to the war effort in Ukraine is so small? So they're going to explain why so small. Defense officials say the true measure of military help is quality, not quantity. Some countries are delivering masses of outdated equipment. France has given 18 Caesar self-propelled artillery units, which are now celebrated along the Ukrainian front line. The Ukrainian front line is well over 1,000 kilometers long. So 18 of anything along a front line that long it's a joke. It really is a joke. The BBC continues, Ukraine's Caesars are fully 1/4 of France's entire mobile artillery. It cannot offer much more without making itself vulnerable in regions where it is already committed. And then they talk about all of these places France is involved in militarily, thousands of miles away from its own borders. The article continues. It says France's relative absence in Ukraine undermines its bid for leadership in the cause of European defense. Already, many countries of Eastern Europe are wary of President Macron, who they believe was far too indulgent towards Russia's Vladimir Putin in the first months of the war. A narrative has taken root according to which France still feels ambivalent about an outright Ukrainian triumph. But maybe France feels ambivalent about an outright Ukrainian triumph because the US is running out of ammunition to send Ukraine. The war is far from over. They have no more ammunition to send them. France has no more self-propelled howitzers to send them. Everyone is out of everything, and you're still in the middle of an intense armed conflict. Maybe that's why they're ambivalent about an outright Ukrainian triumph, because that's the reality. I noticed in this article, none of the experts that they were citing, none of these people criticizing France for not sending more, none of them actually explained specifically what France could possibly send them that would be significant aid that would help Ukraine continue fighting on. I didn't see anything like that mentioned in the article, and I've seen it nowhere else as well. So as Ukraine is running out of ammunition, as well as guns and also tanks, don't forget they're out of tanks as well, as they're running out of all of these things to actually fight on the battlefield, in the middle of this all or nothing offensive that they've engaged in, because I say all or nothing because once this offensive is over, they have nothing else left. They have nothing else left to even properly defend themselves, which is why Russia is advancing in Bakhmut at the moment. It has already begun. They're also out of time. They're out of time. So here is another ABC Australia article from September 25th. Rain, mud to hinder war efforts in Ukraine as Russia pushes ahead with mobilization. The article says the onset of autumn weather with rains making the ground too muddy for tanks is beginning to cloud Ukraine's efforts to take back more Russian-held territory before winter freezes the battlefields, a Washington-based think tank says. For Ukrainian and Russian military planners, the clock is ticking, with the approach of winter expected to make fighting more complicated, especially for whoever's on the offensive. Speaking to U.S. broadcaster CBS, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said he was bracing for more Russian strikes on Ukraine's electrical infrastructure as the Kremlin seeks to ramp up the pressure on Ukraine and its Western backers as the weather gets colder. Mr. Zelensky warned that this winter will be very difficult. They will shoot missiles and they will target our electric grid. This is a challenge, but we are not afraid of that, he said. Well, Ukraine's civilian infrastructure is all that much more open and fair game after this attack on the Crimean Bridge, and the Ukrainian government and the collective Western media celebrating it. No compunction at all about attacking Russian civilian infrastructure. Why should Russia have any compunction about attacking Ukrainian civilian infrastructure? Again, they are painting themselves into this corner. The article continues. Already, rainy weather is bringing muddy conditions that are starting to limit the mobility of tanks and other heavy weaponry, according to the Institute of the Study of War. And that is a Washington-based think tank connected to the American State Department officials directly involved in the illegal overthrow of the elected government of Ukraine in 2014, which created this crisis to begin with. Now, if both sides, their ground forces are restricted because of the conditions on the ground, whichever side has a larger air force, a larger fleet of drones and long-range weaponry that is indifferent to the mud on the ground, they are going to have the advantage. And remember, as this weather changes, the conditions on the ground, the leaves are also falling off the trees. And if you have been following this conflict closely, especially on Telegram, watching all of the footage, you can see that Ukraine has been making good use out of foliage in forested areas. They are hiding in there. It makes it much harder for drones to spot Ukrainian forces assembling, moving, or just hiding. But once the leaves start falling off the trees, it will make it much easier for drones to find targets, then to direct artillery, rockets, missiles toward them, and also much easier for Russia's substantial military aviation to begin finding and destroying targets. I have said it before. I'm going to continue saying it. It is reality. This offensive launched by Ukraine is finite. It has a limit. It is reaching the limit. When it is fully extended, it'll be overextended, stretched out physically across the battlefield. It'll be thinned out because of the heavy losses they are suffering. Russia, on the other hand, is specifically, and even the Western media has noted this, they are specifically avoiding becoming encircled or finding themselves in a position where they suffer heavy losses at the hands of this offensive. They are preserving their fighting capacity for later. What happens later? Later, these Russian forces who have preserved their men and equipment are going to be reinforced by 300,000 additional Russian forces and associated equipment. And when they begin pushing back toward Ukrainian lines, they're going to find an enemy that has depleted itself in this all or nothing offensive. This is just common sense. Yeah, I have pointed out how even fanatical pro-Ukrainian voices across the Western media have started picking up on this and realizing this, the implications of this. And we're already seeing the impact of this, the impact of Ukraine overextending itself. We can take a look at this article from Reuters. Ukraine troops involved in tough fighting around key eastern town Zelensky. They're talking about Bakhmut. I was just showing you Bakhmut on the map. The article says Ukrainian troops are involved in very tough fighting near the strategically important eastern town of Bakhmut, which Russia is trying to take, President Vladimir Zelensky said in a video address on Saturday. Although Ukrainian troops have recaptured thousands of square kilometers of land in recent offensives in the east and south, officials say progress is likely to slow once Kiev's forces meet more determined resistance. Again, this is what I have been saying all along. People have said, Brian, you're just coping. Well, this is actually just reality. That is the situation on the ground. Russia deliberately withdrew its forces to put them in a more sustainable defensive position while taking a heavy toll out on Ukraine's forces. They are wearing Ukraine down ahead of their own planned counterattack. The article continues. It says, Russian forces have repeatedly tried to seize Bakhmut, which sits on a main road leading to the cities of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. Both are situated in the industrial Donbas region, which Moscow has yet to fully capture. We are holding our positions in the Donbas, in particular in the Bakhmut direction, where it is very, very difficult now, very tough fighting, said Zelensky. And when Zelensky is saying it's tough fighting, and they mean that they're losing. That's what that means. Here's another article. This time we're looking at Al Jazeera. Ukraine battles Russian advance in key town of Bakhmut. What does Al Jazeera say? They say Ukrainian soldiers are defending the eastern industrial town of Bakhmut as Moscow-backed separatist forces in the war-battered Donetsk region advance after recapturing a series of villages nearby. These articles are this week. These are not old articles. This is Russia on the advance. Bakhmut, a wine-producing and salt-mining town on the main road from Donetsk to the capital Kiev, once home to 70,000 people, would be a major prize if Russia has any hope of securing the region after invading Ukraine in February. It also goes on and says a Ukrainian artillery commander told Al Jazeera Ukrainian soldiers were in Bakhmut because it is a key point. And it is a key point that they have no ability to defend and continue holding. They are going to lose it. They are losing it. The articles are describing how Ukraine is losing it right now. So we keep hearing about how the tide has turned in Ukraine, how Ukraine is on the offensive. The advantage is with them. Russian defenses are crumbling all across the country. Russia is desperate. They don't know what to do. There's nothing they can do. Ukraine is going to push them out of Ukrainian territory. But this is, it's a myth. It is not true. Russia is deliberately withdrawing their forces to wear down these heavy concentrations of Ukrainian forces. They are well aware that the US has no more ammunition to send Ukraine. They're aware that France cannot possibly send any more heavy weaponry to Ukraine. They're aware of that. They know that this is it. Once it's over, Ukraine has nothing left. They're preserving their men and equipment for that moment so that they don't have to lose their men and equipment, throwing them into an offensive against a well-prepared enemy. At the same time, as Ukraine is pushing these offensives in two directions, and again, the third direction, Zaporozhye, toward Melitopol, or that general area, we're still waiting for that offensive to be launched. But in places like Bakhmut, Ukraine admitting that it is a key point, they are incapable of defending it because they are overextended already. It is already starting to show. And from this point onward, it is only going to get worse. There is no way for it to get better if the West is out of heavy weapons and ammunition to send Ukraine. I can only see one possible solution to all of this. That would be NATO attempting to intervene directly. I don't think that that is a good idea. I don't think it necessarily means that NATO or Ukraine will win at that point. But barring something like that, Ukraine has lost this conflict. At the end of this offensive, Ukrainian forces are going to be physically stretched out, their ranks thinned out. They're going to be more vulnerable than ever. They're going to have a very steep price to pay for this offensive. They're already paying it in blood and in equipment, and it is going to be Russian forces who have preserved themselves and an additional 300,000 reinforcements that Ukraine pays that steep price to. So we'll keep an eye on this as it continues to develop. I would keep an eye out for additional attacks on the Crimean Bridge and for the imminent launch of this offensive, Ukrainian offensive, from Zaporozhye toward the Melitopol or that general area to cut the land bridge. That seems to be the plan. Keep an eye out for that. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. If you're watching this on YouTube, please check the video description for other places you can find and follow my work. I'm on Telegram. That is an alternative for Twitter and Facebook. I'm on neither one of those networks. You can find and follow me on Telegram. I update that several times a day. All of my YouTube videos are then automatically backed up on Odyssey and Rumble, so you can subscribe to those channels and follow me there. In the video description, there are also all of the links that I referenced, as well as ways to help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube videos. If an ad ever pops up, please feel free to skip through it. It is not helping me in any way. If you do want to help me out, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee, through Patreon, and only as a last resort, PayPal. They are in the process of changing their policy and making it even more difficult for people to challenge Western propaganda, essentially. To everyone who has been helping out, thank you so much. I could not do this work without that support. And as always, thank you for watching.